The brass casing felt heavier than it should have, not because it weighed anything significant. A spent 7.62 by 51 millimeters NATO shell casing weighed approximately 10.7 g. Not enough to notice in the palm of the hand, but because Petty Officer Second Zara Khatun had been picking them up since 5:30 that morning, and somewhere between the 43rd and the 44th, she had stopped counting and started thinking. That was the dangerous part, the thinking. She knelt in the gravel at the edge of Range 17, Naval Amphibious Base, Coronado, a canvas collection bag hanging from her left shoulder. Her fingers moving with a mechanical precision she had not been taught here, but had carried with her from a life that began long before these fences, these ranges. This particular California sun that had been pressing down on her neck since the first shooter arrived at 0600 sharp. She was 29 years old. She had 9 years of naval service recorded in a file that nobody in this compound had ever bothered to read. And on this morning, on the 19th day of October, she was the brass girl. Before we go any further into this story, drop a comment and let us know what country or state you're watching from. Because this story is about something that happens everywhere, in every institution, in every place where a person's worth gets decided by someone who never once looked past the surface. And if that has ever happened to you, you already know exactly where this is going. The candidates were assembled at the 300-yard firing line, 16 of them, all male, all physically large in the way that men selected for advanced SEAL training tended to be. Their M4A5 sniper rifles bolt action 7.62 by 51 millimeters, 24 inches, stainless steel barrels, 10 pounds and 3 ounces, each with optics mounted, were positioned on bipods in a prone position. They wore sage green combat shirts, khaki trousers, and the particular expression of men who believed they were exactly where they belonged. The morning light off the Pacific Ocean a mile to the west cut flat and silver across the range. Zara moved along the BMS behind them with a collection bag. She was not supposed to watch the shooting. That was not in the duties outlined for range support personnel, grade E5, to which he had been administratively assigned 11 weeks ago after her previous unit. SEAL Team 3's Logistics Support Detachment was restructured following a budget realignment. She was supposed to collect, log, and deposit. Collect the brass, log the count in the range book, deposit the casings in the marked bins near the range shed at the south end of the compound. She was not supposed to know that the wind off San Diego Bay was blowing 11 miles per hour at 17 degrees left to right oblique angle at the 300 yards line and 14 miles per hour at the same oblique at the 500 yards line because the marine layer was burning off unevenly from east to west and creating a layered crosswind effect that the candidates had not been briefed on this morning. She knew it anyway. She knew it because her father had taught her to read mirage off warm asphalt at age 9 in a parking lot outside Fort Lund, North Carolina, with a 10 power spotting scope and a composition notebook and the patience that only a man who had spent 14 years as a USMC scout sniper could bring to a Sunday afternoon lesson for a daughter who kept asking questions he could not bring himself to stop answering. Staff Sergeant Rashid Khatun, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, 1st Marine Division. 2 combat deployments to Iraq. 3 to Afghanistan. Awarded the Navy Cross for a single-handedly sustained engagement near Sandhin, Helmand Province in 2014, in which he held an overwatch position for 11 hours under direct fire to protect the extraction of a wounded platoon. He had died not in combat, but in a car accident on Interstate 5 near Oceanside, California in March of 2019, 27 days after his final retirement processing was complete. He had been 44 years old. Zara had been 23. She was 6 feet away from the nearest firing line when the first candidate took a shot. She did not need to look at the target to know where it had landed. She heard it in the report in the 1.7-second lag that separated the muzzle crack from the impact echo in the way the mirage on the target face shimmered 2 in left to center, 2 in left low by 1. She moved to the next casing, picked it up, dropped it into the bag. Maybe you know someone who has carried something like this. A skill they were never given permission to use. A thing they knew in their bones that no one around them thought to ask about. Drop a comment if you have. Tell us what it was. Your story might be the one that keeps someone else going. The instructor standing at the near edge of the firing line was Master Chief Petty Officer Drayden Wix's. He was 6 feet 2 inches in tall, 218 pounds, with a shaved head and a jaw that appeared to have been constructed specifically for the purpose of holding a disapproving set of the mouth. He had 22 years in Naval Special Warfare. He had been lead instructor of the Naval Special Warfare Advanced Sniper Course at Coronado for 4 years running, and in that time, 56 candidates out of the 127 who had entered his program had graduated. That was a 44% graduation rate, and he cited it the way other men cited their combat decorations as proof of something about himself that could not otherwise be spoken aloud. He was watching candidate second-class Jonah Price at the firing line, and he was not in a good mood because Price's last shot had gone 2 inches left and low by 1, and Wix had not seen why, which meant he had missed something which Wix regarded as a personal affront. He turned from the firing line and saw Zara Khatun standing 11 foot behind the berm with a canvas bag on her shoulder and a Kestrel 4500 anemometer in her left hand. The Kestrel 4500 was a handheld digital weather meter. It measured wind speed, wind direction, temperature, humidity, density, altitude, and a dozen other atmospheric variables to within 3% accuracy. It was the same instrument used by military snipers worldwide as a primary field weather tool. It cost $329 retail. Zara had bought hers with her own money 6 years ago. Wix walked to her. He covered the 11 feet in approximately 4 seconds. "What is that?" His voice was not loud. Men like Wix did not need volume. They had learned long ago that a low voice in the right register carried farther than shouting. Zara held the Kestrel up slightly. "Wind meter, Master Chief." He looked at the device. He looked at her. "Your range support." "Yes, Master Chief." "Range support collects brass." "Yes, Master Chief." "Does range support require a wind meter?" There was a pause behind them on the firing line, not a pause in the shooting. Price was already cycling the bolt on his M4A5, preparing for his next round in the 5-shot assessment string. But a pause in the ambient noise, the kind that happens when people with an earshot stop pretending not to listen. "No, Master Chief," Zara said. Wix held out his hand. She placed the Kestrel in it. He looked at the digital readout. 11.3 miles per hour, 17.4 degree oblique. He looked back at her, and something moved behind his eyes that was not quite recognition and not quite contempt, but occupied the narrow, uncomfortable space between them. "Get back to work," he said. He kept the Kestrel. "If this story is already resonating with you, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know what you think of Zara so far. Sometimes it only takes one person deciding to take something from you to show you exactly what that thing was worth to begin with." He returned it 3 hours later, setting it on the edge of the range shed without looking at her, without a word, in the particular way of men who have decided to pretend a thing did not happen. Zara picked it up, noted that the display had been wiped of its logged history from the morning, and placed it in the cargo pocket of her trousers without expression. That afternoon, 4 of the 16 candidates ran their second assessment string. The afternoon session was the more demanding one. 500-yard targets, 12 inches steel plates in a crosswind that had shifted to 19 miles per hour by 400 hours because the marine layer had fully dissipated and the Santa Ana effect off the eastern hills was beginning to express itself. This was not a condition the range schedule had accounted for. Zara was at the south berm sorting brass by caliber into the appropriate bins when she heard candidate second-class Luis Ferrante call out his wind calculation to Senior Chief Petty Officer Todd Ballard, who was supervising the afternoon session. Ferrante said he had a right to left wind at 12 miles per hour, and he was holding 3.5 MOA into it. Zara sat down the bin. The wind at the 500-yard line as of 4 minutes ago, when she had taken her last measurement near the shed, was running at 19.2 miles per hour, not 12. Ferrante was reading the vegetation movement near the firing line where a stand of coastal scrub oak was buffering the full wind speed. The actual surface wind was 19.2, and he was holding for 12. His shot would miss by approximately 9 in to the left. She did not mean to speak. She would tell herself later that it was an involuntary response, the kind of thing that happens when the body acts before the mind finishes its calculation. What came out of her mouth was quiet, directed at no one in particular, barely above a murmur. "It's a 19. He needs 5.8. Ferrante heard it. Ballard heard it. Wicks, who had been walking the south berm behind her, heard it. Ferrante hesitated, looked over his shoulder, looked at Zara the way men look at something they have never been asked to consider before. He adjusted his hold. He sent the round. The 12-inch steel plate at 500 yards rang out with a clean, flat concussion of a solid hit center mass. There was a 3-second silence that belonged entirely to Wicks. He crossed the 14 feet between them in a way that was not walking and was not quite running, and occupied the particular middle space that senior enlisted men use when they intend to remind someone of the full distance between their ranks. Did I just watch the brass collector coach my candidate? He said the 16 candidates at the firing line had all turned now. The 2 instructors at the far end of the range, Chief Petty Officers Ben Calder and Marco Viva, were watching with the stillness of men who understood that something was happening but had not yet determined which direction to face. Zara stood with the sorting bin at her side. She met Wicks's eyes without blinking, which was either courage or a failure of self-preservation instinct. And at this particular moment, those two things were indistinguishable from each other. "I apologize, Master Chief," she said. "It was out of line." "Out of line," he repeated. He let that settle. "You want to know what I think about that?" "No, Master Chief, I think," he said, stepping one pace closer, "that a person who picks up other people's garbage has a very specific role on this range, and that role does not include ballistic consultation." From somewhere near the firing line, there was a sound. It was not laughter exactly. It was the sound of men who are not sure whether to laugh, but have decided to direct their expressions toward laughter, because it is safer than the alternative. "You a sniper." He did not say those exact words in that moment. He did not need to. He had said the equivalent in a different register, one that landed in the chest rather than the ears. And Zara Khatun absorbed it the way she had learned to absorb things at range 17. And before range 17, and long before that in a Navy that had not yet fully decided what she was. We're going to pause right here and ask you something. Have you ever been in a room where someone decided what you were before you ever opened your mouth? Have you ever had a thing you really knew in the quiet and certain way that only comes from years of carrying it dismissed by someone who did not know half what you did? Tell us about it in the comments, because what happened next at range 17 was not a coincidence. It was an accumulation, and accumulations take time, and time takes witnesses. Wicks assigned her 3 additional duties the following morning. She was to be at the range shed at 0445 1 hour before the first session to sweep and inventory the equipment storage space. She was to remain on the range until 1900 hours, which was 1.5 hours past the official end of the training day. She was to complete the end-of-day range log manually in addition to her collection and sorting duties. She did all 3 without complaint. The second day was the same. The third day, Wicks added a 4th additional duty, the cleaning and lubrication of 16M 4A5 rifles. At the end of the shooting day, a task that was typically divided among the 4 assigned range maintenance personnel. She was to do it alone. She did. On the evening of the 4th day, she was completing the rifle cleaning detail in the armory shed. The last light going amber through the corrugated metal wall slats when Seaman recruit David Pack appeared in the doorway. He was 22 years old, 5 feet 10 inches in, 163 pounds, with a kind of face that had not yet made its final decision about what it intended to look like. He was the youngest candidate in the current course. He had also posted the lowest initial qualification score, a 71 out of 100 during the first week's basic marksmanship assessment. He stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee in paper cups from the mess facility and looking at her with the uncertainty of a man who was not sure whether his gesture was welcome. "I thought you might." He started, then stopped. Started again. "You've been here since 045. That's 14 hours. I thought coffee." Zara looked at him. She took the cup. He sat on an overturned ammunition crate near the door. He did not speak again for a while, which Zara noted as a point in his favor, because most people who brought coffee also brought questions, and she was not in the condition to answer questions at the end of a 14-hour day. After a while, he said, "That hold you gave Ferrante, the 5.8. How did you know?" She set down the rifle she was cleaning, laid it on the mat, picked up the bore brush and the cleaning rod, and thought for a moment about not answering. I measured it, she said with the wind thing. Kestrel, 4,500. I've been measuring atmospheric conditions on this range every morning for 11 weeks. He absorbed that, and you just knew the hold. Sierra Matchking 175 grained bullet BC of 0.505 at 500 yards and a 19.2 miles per hour crosswind at a 90 degrees true angle. You're looking at approximately 30.5 in of drift. Divide that by your MOA value at distance 5.236 in per MOA at 500 yards and you get 5.83 MOA. I rounded down to 5.8. Pac was quiet for a moment. You calculated that in your head. It's not difficult once you know the formula. Ferrante has been in the course for 7 weeks. She did not respond to that, and you just figured it out in, 30 seconds? I've been figuring it out for 20 years, she said. I just haven't been allowed to do it officially. That was the most she had said to anyone on this range in 11 weeks. She did not know why she had said it to him. Something about the corrugated metal walls and the amber light and the 2 cups of paper coffee suggested that certain things could be said here that could not be said in daylight on an open range. Pac nodded slowly. He did not say he was sorry, which was the right choice because she had not wanted sympathy. He said, "My score in the first week assessment was a 71. I know." He looked up. "I've watched every assessment session." She said, "Your natural point of aim is slightly right of your bone support structure. You're compensating with muscular tension in your right shoulder. That's why your groups open on the 5th shot of every string. Your muscles fatigue at exactly the right interval to throw the last shot." She went back to the bore brush. "You also close your eyes when you break the trigger." He opened his mouth, closed it. "How do your left hand tightens on the pistol grip 0.3 seconds before your right hand completes the trigger press. You anticipate the recoil. It's a conditioned response. It can be corrected in 3 sessions of dry fire if you practice the right way." The light in the shed had gone from amber to gray. Outside, the Pacific fog was beginning its nightly migration inland from the bay, the temperature dropping toward 56 degrees Fahrenheit, the kind of California cold that surprised people who had never understood that the ocean coast was not the desert coast. Pac sat down his coffee cup. "Why are you picking up brass?" It was a blunt question, the kind that could only be asked by someone too young to know better or too sincere to care about the difference. Zara continued cleaning the 14th rifle on the mat, "Because that's the assignment I was given." "But I know what I know," she said. "That doesn't mean anyone's required to give me permission to use it." He nodded. He stood. He picked up the empty cups at the doorway. He paused and said, "My father worked a loading dock for 22 years. He knew every shipping route on the East Coast better than any of the dispatch managers. They promoted 3 of those managers over him." He stopped. "Then he told me once that the only thing worse than being unseen is being seen and then dismissed. So the second one at least tells you you're real." He left. She sat with the 15th rifle and the cleaning rod and the Great Pacific fog pressing at the corrugated walls and thought about what it meant that a 22-year-old seaman recruit from Baltimore had just said the most accurate thing she had heard in 11 weeks. We want to stop here for a moment and say this. If you have ever felt that way, seen and then dismissed, let us know in the comments. This story is for you. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. The engagement on this video is what allows stories like Zara's to be told. So if you're here, make some noise. Your presence in this community matters more than you know. The weeks at range 17 settled into a rhythm that was punishing in its predictability. Wicks arrived each morning at 0545, reviewed the range schedule, conducted the pre-session instructor briefing, and began the training day with the particular authority of a man who had never questioned whether the authority was his. The candidates ran drills. The brass fell. Zara collected it, and every morning, without fail, she took her kestrel readings at 4 points along the range. The 300-yard line, the 500-yard line, a 700-yard line, and the 875-yard terminal BM, and recorded them in a small composition notebook that she kept in the left breast pocket of her utility uniform, pressed against her sternum in the same position where her father had kept his own logbook for all 14 years of his service. Rashid Khatun's logbook was currently in the bottom of her sea bag in the enlisted barracks at NAB Coronado. It was a standard government-issue composition notebook, black cover, 100 pages, 70% filled with handwritten data entries in his precise block printing. The rest of the pages blank and waiting as if he had always intended to come back to them. She had not opened it since November of 2019, 8 months after his death. She knew everything in it by memory. She had been reading it since she was 12 years old. On the 6th week of her range support assignment, a Thursday, the training day included a formal stalking exercise, the component of SEAL sniper qualification that assessed a candidate's ability to move undetected across open terrain, close within 200 yards of an observer position, and take 2 consecutive shots with the observer actively scanning for the shooter's position. Stalking exercises were, in Wicks's own words, what separated precision shooters from actual snipers. 13 of the 15 remaining candidates. One had dropped from the course in week 4 due to a training injury. Another had been administratively removed in week 5 for a separate matter. Had not been fully briefed on, were assigned start positions at the 1,000-yard mark of the main training range in terrain that consisted of low coastal scrub, sandy soil, patches of dried chaparral, and the kind of flat, shimmering ground that hid nothing and revealed everything to an experienced observer. The exercise observer was Senior Chief Petty Officer Todd Ballard, positioned at the 200-yard mark with a 20 power spotting scope. The exercise began at 0730. By 0840, 7 of the 13 candidates had been identified and eliminated. Ballard was precise and merciless with the scope, calling out GPS coordinates with the flat efficiency of a man who had done this many hundreds of times before. There was no rancor in the eliminations, just the quiet final authority of the observer calling. Candidate 7, position identified, exercise complete. And the candidate rising from whatever brush pile or terrain depression he had spent the last 70 minutes constructing his hidey in and walking back toward the staging area with a particular posture of a man recalculating something fundamental. Zara was at the 200-yard position, not because she had been assigned there, but because her brass collection duties on this morning extended to the range shed at the base of the observer platform. And the observer platform was directly adjacent to where she needed to be. She was 17 feet behind Ballard when candidate Pack entered the final 300 yards of his stalk. She could see him. She could see him because she knew where to look and because she had been watching for the past 37 minutes and had tracked his movement by the tiny, barely visible disturbances in the mirage band above the scrub line, rather than by any direct visual. He was moving at a pace of approximately 11 m/hour, which was correct. His ghillie suit, the camouflage overgarment constructed from natural and synthetic materials to break up a human silhouette, was built around a base of local chaparral, and it was built well. Ballard had not found him. With 4 minutes left in the exercise clock, Pack reached his final position, 173 yards from the observer platform. He settled. Zara watched his breathing slow from the almost imperceptible movement of the ghillie material. She watched him acquire his target, a 12 inches square target panel on the platform railing. And then she watched something go wrong. He shifted his head 3 centimeters to the left to acquire a cleaner sight picture. 3 centimeters. The ghillie material over his right shoulder moved less than the width of 2 fingers. Ballard's scope tracked instantly. He found it in under 2 seconds. Candidate Pack position identified. Exercise. He moved for sight picture acquisition. Zara's voice was level. The ghillie breach was involuntary. He was at 173 yards with a clean target acquisition prior to the movement. There was a silence. Ballard turned from the scope. He was 41 years old, built like someone who had been welded together from institutional grievance and rigid protocol. And he looked at Zara with the expression of a man who had just heard a language he did not recognize, spoken fluently in a room he considered to be private. "What did you say?" "I said the movement was for sight picture correction." Senior Chief. He held concealment for 38 minutes and closed to 173 yards. The breach was in the final positioning adjustment, not in movement or in approach. By Phase 1 stalking standards that I know, the phase standard qualifies as a marginal pass with noted deficiency. Ballard looked at her for 4 seconds. looked at where Pack's position would have been though Pack had already risen and was standing upright at the 173 yards mark. Looked back at her, looked at the scoring sheet on his clipboard. He wrote something. He put the clipboard back under his arm. He did not tell her she was wrong. He did not tell her she was right either. He turned back to the observer platform. The exercise continued. Pack's score that day was marked as marginal pass with noted deficiency, which meant he remained in the course. That evening, Wicks called Zara to the instructor's planning room, a 12 by 14 space at the south end of the range operations building that smelled of gun oil and old paperwork and the accumulated authority of men who had been making decisions in it for many years. He was behind the desk. Ballard was at the wall to his left. Chief Petty Officer Ben Calder was near the door, leaning against the door frame with his arms crossed and an expression that Zara could not fully read. Something between difference and discomfort. Wicks let the silence settle for 7 seconds before he spoke. This was a technique. She had seen it applied to candidates. She understood it as a technique which reduced its power from significant to mild. You keep inserting yourself into operations that have nothing to do with your duties. He said, I understand that, Master Chief. Do you? Yes, Master Chief, because from where I'm sitting, you have been on this range for 6 weeks, and in that time, you have coached a candidate on his win hold. You have disputed an observer's stalking evaluation, and you have been operating a precision weather instrument during working hours instead of performing your assigned duties. Does that sound like someone who understands? She held his gaze. She could have lowered it. There would have been a tactical advantage in lowering it, in offering the body language of deference that the situation called for. But her father had once told her something at a firing range in North Carolina when she was 11 years old and had just outscored the rangemaster's son on a 300-yard steel drill. And the rangemaster had looked at her father with an expression remarkably similar to Wicks's current one. Her father had said afterward on the drive home, Baby girl, there are 2 kinds of looking away. There is the looking away that says you respect someone, and there is the looking away that says you have decided they are right. Do not confuse them. Not ever. I understand my position, Master Chief, Zara said, but I want you to know that I have been on this range for 6 weeks, and in that time, I have measured atmospheric conditions at 4 observation points every morning and recorded them. I have watched every assessment session. I know the performance profile of every candidate in this course. Wicks was very still. I'm not confused about my duties, she continued, but I'm also not confused about what I know. From the doorway, Ben Calder shifted his weight. The shift was subtle, barely perceptible, but it was there. What you know, which repeated slowly as if the phrase was a thing he was testing for structural integrity. Yes, Master Chief. He leaned back in his chair. He looked at her for a long time, and in that long time, she understood that something had changed in the room, had shifted from the territory of an administrative reprimand into something else, something more personal and therefore more dangerous. You know, he said finally, and there was something in his voice now that you recognized as the beginning of contempt worn as amusement. The Marine Corps Scout Sniper course at Pendleton has a 44% graduation rate. The course you are watching from the cheap seats, the course you think you have opinions about, washes out more than half of every class. Men who have been training their entire careers. Men who have been in combat. Men who understand what this profession actually demands. He paused. And you're telling me that you, the brass girl, have something to offer? Ballard looked at the floor. Calder looked at his shoes. Wicks said. His voice had gone almost gentle with it. A sniper. The question was not meant to receive an answer. It was meant to end the conversation and redefine the terms of everything that came after. It was a question that arrived the way certain weapons do, not with a bang, but with a single clean, precisely placed impact. From somewhere outside the planning room, single window, the Pacific fog had arrived full against the glass, and the range lights beyond the window were turning it into something that looked like smoke. Yes, Zara Cotton, said a sniper. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then for the doorway, a sound not from Calder, from Ballard. And from somewhere behind Ballard from the corridor, where 2 of the course candidates had apparently been passing at the wrong moment and had stopped to listen. The sound began as a single exhale of disbelief and expanded into the particular laughter of people who have found something that confirms what they already believed. It was not a cruel laugh in the immediate technical sense. It was the laugh of people who had already decided what the world contained and were relieved to find evidence that they were right. Zara did not smile. She did not look at the wall. She stood in a room with her hands at her sides, and she let the laugh move past her the way a shooter lets a crosswind move past before calling the final flag. Wicks looked at her with an expression she would think about for a long time afterward. It was not the expression she had expected. She had expected full contempt. What she saw instead was something more complicated, something that in a different man, in a different room, in a different institution, might have been the beginning of curiosity. "All right," he said. The laughter stopped. "All right," he said again. He leaned forward in his chair and folded his hands on the desk. "You want to be a sniper? Then be a sniper. I will give you exactly one opportunity, and that opportunity will be in front of every instructor on this compound, in front of every candidate in this course, and in front of whoever else happens to be on this base. On the day I set it up, he let a half-second pass. You will shoot the advanced qualification string. Unknown distances, no range data given, no coaching, no second chances." He tilted his head slightly. 3 targets. You put a round on all 3. I will personally sign your request to join this course. You fail to hit all 3. I never hear your assessment input on this range again. You perform your duties without improvisation. And this conversation never took place. He sat back. You have 2 weeks to prepare. Zara looked at him. "Do Master Chief," she said. "If you're still watching, and we think you are, drop a comment right now. What do you think Wicks was actually afraid of?" Because something in his eyes in that room was not just about authority. Something in there was older than this range, older than this course, and it was looking at Zara Platoon, the way certain things look at the thing they most need to be wrong about. Tell us what you think. Drop your thoughts below. We read them. She spent the first of her 2 weeks of preparation in the way that she had always prepared for important things. Quietly, systematically alone, and with her father's logbook open on the bunk in her barracks room. The logbook. She had not opened it in nearly 4 years. She had kept it in the sea bag because keeping it in the sea bag felt like keeping a door closed in a room where the furniture still remembered the person who had last arranged it. But now she laid it on the wool blanket at 2,100 hours on a Thursday, the fog pressing at the barracks window, and opened it to page 1. His handwriting block, print perfect, the letters carved rather than written. The way men write who have been trained to print clearly under conditions where a misread character could mean a misshot at a distance that mattered. The first page was a table of atmospheric data from Camp Lewin in March of 2007. Temperature 61 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind 8 miles per hour in NW. Humidity 67%. He had been 22 years old. He had been in his first year of scout sniper training, and he had already been keeping records with the discipline of someone who understood that mastery was not a talent, but a practice. 100 pages, 14 years, she read until midnight. The cartoon lock was on page 43. It was not referred to by that name in the logbook. He had simply written it as hand position modification. Right trigger finger lateral bone support through dorsal metacarpal reduces anticipatory flinch 0, 2, XMOA improvement at 1, 0, 0, Y in testing. He had drawn a precise diagram beside the notation. She had studied that diagram so many times that she could have reproduced it from memory without opening the notebook. And she had in fact done exactly that, practicing the hand position dry in the barracks with an unloaded M4A5 borrowed from the armory on her maintenance authorization for 3 hours on the first night and 2 hours on each night that followed. The cartoon lock was in its technical essence a modification of a standard firing grip that redistributed the pressure of the trigger press through the lateral edge of the first metacarpal rather than through the direct pad of the index finger. It reduced the micro tremor that propagated through the hand at the moment of trigger break. A micro tremor so small it was effectively invisible to casual observation, but significant enough at distances beyond 700 yards to shift a point of impact by 2.3 MOA. At 1,000 yards, 2.3 MOA was 24.1 inches. At 1,000 yards, 24.1 in was the difference between a hit and a miss. Her father had discovered it while trying to diagnose a persistent 3 o'clock shift in his long-range groups during his second deployment. Lying in a hide in the Kunar province at 300 hours with a notebook and a flashlight, and the particular patience of a man who refused to accept that the shot he knew he was capable of was somehow different from the shot he was actually making. He had found it. He had fixed it. He had never formally published it, never reported it up the chain of training command, never asked for credit. He had written it on page 43 of a composition notebook and kept shooting. Zara had been using the cartoon lock for 11 years. She had never told anyone. Now she practiced in the barracks until 0:30, then set the rifle down and lay on her back on the bunk and stared at the ceiling and thought about 2 weeks and 3 targets at unknown distances in a room full of men who had already decided what she was. She thought about her father at 22 at a range in Lund, keeping records in block print. She thought about 309 confirmed kills, about a woman from Ukraine who had walked into a Soviet Army recruitment office in 1941 at the age of 24 with a shooting record that should have silenced every argument, and who had fought for the right to be used rather than protected, and who had become the deadliest female sniper in history, because she refused to accept that the opinion of a frightened institution was the same as fact. She thought about brass casings, about the 43rd and the 44th, about the weight of things that weigh nothing. Then she closed her father's logbook, pressed it flat against her sternum for a moment in the dark, and went to sleep. The 2 weeks moved the way time moves when something important is waiting at the end of it, not faster, not slower, but with a heightened clarity. Each detail arriving sharper than usual. The morning light off the Pacific more particular. The sound of the M4A5 reports of the range carrying a different quality than they had before. She continued her range support duties without deviation. She continued her morning atmospheric readings. She continued the detailed log. She continued the rifle maintenance rotations, the brass collection, the sorting, the end-of-day documentation. And every evening after 2,000 hours, she went to the range shed, not to clean rifles, to shoot. Senior Chief Petty Officer Harlan Thorne had made this possible. Thorne was 63 years old, retired from Naval Special Warfare 4 years prior, and currently employed as a civilian range maintenance contractor at NAB Coronado through a services agreement with the Base Operations Command. He was 5 feet 8 inches in tall, 174 pounds. With a particular physique of men who have spent more time in prone firing positions and standing ones, a compression through the thoracic spine, a slightly forward shoulder set, hands that were always slightly curled even at rest, as if they expected a rifle to be placed in them at any moment. He had served with her father in 2009 at a joint training exercise in Yuma, Arizona. They had been close for 11 years. Thorne had attended the funeral. He had kept the number. When Zara had been assigned to Range 17 11 weeks ago, he had been the first person she had recognized, and he had taken one look at her and said very quietly, "I know why you're here." Not the assignment. I mean, why you're here. She had not answered because she had not been sure of the answer herself. Now she knew. Thorne gave her access to the range shed from 200 to 2,200 each evening under his maintenance authorization. He also provided her with the 13 Malawian Quachas Mod 7, the Navy's precision long-range rifle chambered in 30-00 Winchester Magnum, 27 inches barrel, 15.7 pounds with a Schmidt and Bender 5-25x56mm optic mounted, capable of accurate first-round hits at distances exceeding 1,800 yards in trained hand. He had one in his personal collection, legally owned, brought onto the range through the civilian contractor equipment authorization. Your father built that platform, he said, setting it on the bench on the first evening. Not literally, but the work you're going to do with it, the foundation of it that came from Rashid. So, in a manner of speaking, he paused. In every manner of speaking. She did not cry. She had not cried about her father in 4 years. Not because the grief was absent, but because she had converted it into something else, into a practice and a persistence that had nowhere else to go. She picked up the 13 Malawian Quachas. The first evening was zero confirmation. She fired 7 rounds at 100 yards to establish the scope's baseline. The scope was clean. Groups were measuring 0.4343 MOA at 100 yard, which was within specification. Good. The second evening, 500 yards, 5-round groups averaged 0.67 MOA, within acceptable parameters for the platform. The third, 700 yards, 4-round groups, 0.89 MOA. The first round was slightly high. She had overcompensated for the coriolis effect at the latitude of San Diego, which required a 0.22 MOA right correction for northward fired shots over 600 yards, and she logged the correction and applied it, and the remaining 3 rounds were within 0.71 MOA of each other. Thorne sat behind her on the second stool, saying nothing, watching through the spotting scope. On the fourth evening, she pushed to 1,000 yards. The target was a 10 inches steel plate set at the far end of the range facility's maximum distance position. The evening wind off the bay was running at 13.6 miles per hour at an oblique angle. She measured precisely at the firing position and estimated at 2 intermediate positions using the vegetation deflection method her father had described on page 67 of the logbook. She calculated the coriolis correction 0.4 MOA right for the latitude of 32.6 degrees north. She applied the 1.1 MOA elevation correction for the Sierra Match King 220-grain 30-Win mag projectile at 1,000 yards at an atmospheric density altitude of 83 feet above sea level. She settled into the Platoon lock. 3 breaths, not the military breathing protocol of 2 preparatory and 1 firing breath. Her father's method. 3 full breaths taken slowly, each exhale releasing not just air, but the accumulated tension in the spine, the shoulder, the hand, until what remained was not relaxed exactly, but still the difference between a bowl of water at rest and a bowl of water with something beneath the surface. Deciding not to move, she broke the trigger. The 3,000 Win mag round left the muzzle at 2,950 foot purse, carrying 3,800 FTLB of energy, and traveled 1,000 yards in approximately 1.1 seconds. The 10 inches steel plate rang. Thorne said nothing for 4 seconds. Then center mass. He paused. Then your father would have said the trigger brake was clean. She loaded the next round. If you're watching this, and you have ever practiced something in private that the world had not yet given you permission to do publicly, drop a comment below. Because what Zara Platoon was doing in that shed every night is what all the great ones do. They do not wait for permission to become excellent. They become excellent first, and then they let the world catch up. Tell us in the comments, when did you first realize that you were better than the room you were in? By the end of the first week of preparation, she was shooting consistent 0.8 MOA groups at 1,000 yards with the 13 Malawian Quatches. By the end of the 11th day, she was at 0.67 MOA at that distance. Her extreme long-range capability, the untested limit, the thing she had calculated but not yet confirmed, was approximately 1,800 yards, assuming the wind and atmospheric conditions held within operational parameters. The question was what Wicks would set for the 3 unknown distance targets. She spent time on this. She worked it the way her father had worked the problem of the Corolla shift systematically, empirically from first principles. Wicks knew she had been operating at close and medium range on range 17. He did not know about the evening sessions. He would set targets at what he considered to be challenging but not impossible distances for a range support personnel member with no official sniper training. He would likely open with something in the 500 to 800 yards range to establish confidence, then escalate. The middle target would be the one he believed would end it probably in the 200 to 400 wide band, where Corolla's corrections and precise atmospheric reading became genuinely critical factors. She planned for 1,400 yards as the probable maximum. She prepared for 1,800. On the evening of the 12th day, something happened that she had not planned for. She was in the barracks running through a dry fire session at 2,130 hours when there was a knock at the door. She did not get many knocks. She opened it to find Senior Chief Ballard, not in his uniform, but in civilian clothes, which was unusual enough that she noted it immediately. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who had started walking somewhere and had not fully committed to being where his feet had brought him. "I want to make sure you understand what you're walking into," he said. "On the day of the qualification, Wicks is going to set it up in a way that doesn't favor you." Zara looked at him. He's going to pick distances that Ballard stopped. The third target, he's not going to put it at 1,400 yards. She waited. "He's going to go further," Ballard said. "He's been measuring the range." He found a position on the eastern ridge of a facility that gives a clean line of sight distance of. He stopped again. Something in his face was working against itself. The part of him that had been Wicks's enforcer for 4 years, fighting the part that had watched her absorb every punishing duty and come back the next morning at 0445 and start again without complaint. He's measuring it at 1,891 yards. 1,891 yards. The number arrived in her chest with a specific weight. 1,891 yards was not a common engagement distance. It was not a distance that appeared in most training curricula. It was a distance at which the 3,000 Win mag round, specifically the Sierra Match King 220 grain projectile at a muzzle velocity of 2,950 feet per second, would take approximately 2.4 seconds to reach its target. In 2.4 seconds, a 15 miles per hour wind would move the bullet approximately 67 in from its unadjusted point of aim. The Corolla's correction at that distance at the latitude of San Diego was 2.1 MOA. The bullet drop from muzzle to target at that distance was 547. Music, in requiring a 28.9 MOA elevation, hold above point of aim at 1,891 yards. There was no margin. There was no close enough. There is only the solution calculated correctly, applied precisely, and trusted completely. She looked at Ballard. "Thank you, Senior Chief." He nodded once. He started to leave. "Why are you telling me?" she said. He stopped, did not turn all the way around, kept his weight toward the door. "Because I watched you clean 16 rifles in 4 hours alone without complaint. And I watched you coach a kid on a stalking score that my evaluation was going to fail. And I watched you stand in Wicks's office. We said what he said." He paused. "And I've been in this institution for 19 years, and I can count on one hand the times I've seen someone absorb that kind of weight and not bend an inch." He looked at the floor, so he left. Zara closed the door. She stood in the center of the barracks room. The 13 Malawian kwaches was on the bunk. The log book was on the shelf. The Kestrel 4500 was on the desk. The Pacific fog was pressing its flat, gray face against the window with the same patience it brought every night to this coast. 1,891 yards. She picked up the logbook, opened it to page 43. Read the diagram of the cartoon, Locke, one more time, though she did not need to. Though she had the diagram mapped in perfect detail on every neural pathway that connected her eyes to her hands, she read it anyway, because some things deserve to be read on the night before. She turned to the last page of a logbook. The last written entry was dated February 17th, 2019, 8 days before her father had finished his retirement processing and 27 days before he died. The entry read wind 6 miles per hour, W temperature 58 degrees Fahrenheit, range 10000 Y groups at 0.52 MOA. The lock is clean. Everything after this is just execution below the entry. The remaining pages were blank. She took out a pen in the space below the last entry. She wrote one line, October 19th, wind TBD, range 1,891 Y. The lock is ready. Everything after this is just execution. She closed the logbook. She set it on the shelf. She turned off the light. 2 days remained. Stay with us. Part 2 is coming, and what happens on the eastern ridge of NAB Coronado in the next 48 hours. We'll answer every question this story has asked so far. If you want to make sure you see it, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment below. Tell us what you think is going to happen on that range. Tell us if you think Wicks deserves what's coming. Tell us your name, where you're from, what this story means to you. Because every comment is a signal. Every comment says this story matters, and the people in it deserve to be remembered. We will see you in part 2. The day before the qualification, Zara did not go to the range shed. This was deliberate. The instinct was to shoot to run another confirmation string at 100 yards to log one more atmospheric data set to find one more variable to control and reduce. She recognized the instinct for what it was, not preparation, anxiety, wearing the clothes of preparation. Her father had written about it on page 78 of a logbook in a note that occupied 4 lines and said more than some men's entire training journals. The day before a shot that matters. Do not shoot. The shot is already in you. Shooting again is just out wearing boots. She had read that at age 13 and not fully understood it. She understood it now. Instead, she sat in a barracks room from 1900 to 2100 hours and ran mental sequences. Not visualization in the casual sense, but the specific technical step-by-step reconstruction of each phase of the firing solution. The position, the natural point of aim, the bone support alignment, the respiratory pause, the cartoon lock settling through her right hand, the trigger press traveling from first contact to break in a clean linear movement with 0 lateral deviation. She ran the sequence for 743 yards for 1,127 yards for 1,891 yards. She ran each one 7 times. At 2,100 hours, she set the 13 Malawian Quatches on the range of the bunk and checked the Schmidt and Bender 5-25x56 mm scope one final time. She rotated the elevation turret to the 100-yard zero position and confirmed the indicator mark. She rotated the windage turret to center and confirmed. She removed and replaced the scope caps. She set the rifle down. She went to sleep at 21:30. She was asleep when the door to the armory shed opened at 0030 hours, and a figure in civilian clothes crossed the 12 feet from the door to the rifle bench in the darkness and spent 4 minutes at the 13 Malawian Quatches with a small L-shaped tool. The figure worked quickly with the efficiency of someone who understood the equipment. The elevation turret was adjusted 4.2 MOA up from 0. A change subtle enough that a casual inspection would not catch it, but significant enough that at 743 yards, it would lift the point of impact 31.2 in above the intended target. The figure left. The door closed. The shed returned to silence, and the sound of the Pacific fog moving against the corrugated metal and the faint persistent smell of HAPA solvent and CL lubricant. The 13 Malawian Quatches sat on the bench in the dark. Its scope adjusted to a lie. At 0430, Zara was awake. She was dressed at 0445 in her utility uniform with a logbook in the left breast pocket and the Kestrel 4500 in the right cargo pocket. And the kind of calm that exists in the space between large decisions and their consequences. A calm that is not the absence of fear, but the product of having made a choice so completely that the fear has nowhere left to land. She went to the armory shed at 0500. She picked up the 13 Malawian Quatches and held it and looked at the elevation turret. The turret indicator needle sat at a position she had not left it at. She had left it at the 100 yards 0 mark. The needle now read 4.2 MOA above 0. The difference was small. The difference was at any distance beyond 400 yards catastrophic. She looked at the turret for 8 seconds. She could feel the intention behind it, the way you can feel the direction of a wind before the grass confirms it. She did not react to the feeling. She set the rifle on the bench. She took out her composition notebook, her own log book, not her father's, a plain black cover that she had been filling with atmospheric data and firing solutions for 6 weeks. And she opened it to the page where she had pre-written the firing solutions for 3 target distances, 743 yards, 1,127 yards, and 1,891 yards. Using the standard atmospheric model for NAB Coronado in October at 0700 hours, temperature 61 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity 73%, density altitude 94 feet above sea level with a 12 miles per hour baseline wind. She looked at the elevation solution for 743 yards, 8.6 MOA above 100 yard 0 with the scope tampered to read 4.2 MOA high. If she dialed the scope to her intended 8.6 MOA, the actual optical axis would be at 12.8 MOA above true 0. At 743 yards, that was 94.8 in high. She would miss entirely. She did not dial the scope at all. She closed the logbook. She picked up the 13 Malawian Quatches. She held it in the position that felt like returning to something rather than picking up something new. The 27 inches barrel balanced across the back of her left hand, the pistol grip warm under her right palm. The weight of 15.7 pounds distributed along the line of her forearm with the rightness of an object that has been held often enough to learn the specific geometry of the person holding it. The sabotage was real, but she had known every firing solution for these distances from memory for 6 days. No turret, no scope dial, only the reticle's internal reference marks, her calculated holdover values, and the cartoon lock and the 3 breaths and the absolute inherited certainty that she had been doing this since she was 9 years old in a parking lot outside Portland. She picked up her gear. She walked the range. The eastern sky above the Coronado Peninsula was showing the first specific gray of pre-dawn, the kind of gray that is not dark and not light, but the precise color of something that has not yet decided what it is. The temperature was 59 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind off the bay, which she measured at the range gate with the Kestrel, was 9.7 miles per hour from the southwest, oblique at 22 degrees. She noted it. She would remeasure at the firing line. The assembled group arrived at 0630. 15 candidates, all of them present. None of them required to be there, but all of them there. Chief Petty Officers Calder and Vuiva, both present. Senior Chief Ballard, present for additional range safety personnel, whose names she did not know. Senior Chief Thorne in his civilian contractor vest, standing at the south edge of the range, weathered and still, and watching with the expression of a man who had waited a long time for a specific morning without knowing its exact date in advance. Enwick standing at the center of the firing line position with his arms crossed, and the particular posture of a man who has arranged a situation to his satisfaction and is now waiting for it to confirm what he already knows. Rear Admiral James Calloway was not supposed to be there. He arrived at 0637 in a gray government vehicle with 2 aides and the unmistakable bearing of a man who commands Naval Special Warfare Command responsible for all Navy SEAL and Special Warfare Combatant Craft crewman training in the continental United States, and who has appeared on a range at 0637 on a Tuesday morning because someone in his command has sent him information about what is scheduled to occur here. Zara noted his 2-star collar devices. She noted Way Wicks's posture changed microscopically when he recognized who had arrived. A single half-second stiffening in the shoulders, quickly controlled, quickly replaced with the practiced composure of a master chief who has been in front of flag officers many times and will not be unsteadied by the presence of one now. Calloway did not introduce himself to Zara. He did not acknowledge her specifically. He walked to the left edge of the firing position, 27 feet from the firing line, and he stood there with his aides, and he watched. No questions, no ceremony. He was there to observe. If you're with us right now, drop a comment. Tell us what you felt when that vehicle arrived. Because sometimes the universe sends a witness exactly when it needs to send one. And sometimes that witness arrives in a gray government car at 0637 on a Tuesday morning and changes the meaning of every single thing that is about to happen. Let's know you're here. Wicks cleared his throat. The exercise, he said, his voice carrying the full register of 22 years of command authority, is a 3-target unknown distance qualification string. Petty Officer Second Ass Cartoon will fire 1 round at each target. No ranging, no data provided, no coaching. He looked at Zara. The targets are steel plates. A hit anywhere on the plate counts. A miss ends the exercise. He paused. 3 targets, 3 rounds. Do you understand the terms? Yes, Master Chief. Mount up. She carried the 13 Malawian Quachas to the prone firing position. A standard bipod setup on a flat shooting mat, sand-colored, positioned at the center of the mark firing line. She settled into the prone. She adjusted the bipod legs 1.3 centimeters shorter on the right side to compensate for the tutory lateral slope of the range surface. She established her natural point of aim by closing her eyes, settling into the position, and opening them to find where the reticle fell without muscular correction. She adjusted her body position twice, each adjustment small until the reticle floated to center without effort. She did not touch the elevation or windage turrets. The Kestrel at the firing position read 11.2 miles per hour from the southwest. The oblique angle had increased to 27 degrees. She logged it. She revised her windage hold from 2.1 MOA to 2.44 MOA left or right applied using the internal reticle hash marks of the Schmidt and Bender rather than the turrets. Wicks walked to the range officer position 15 feet to her right. First target, he said, distance unknown. The target will be exposed for 60 seconds. A red flag dropped at a position 743 yards downrange. The target, a 12 inches circular steel plate, was revealed. 743 yards. She had calculated for this at 11.2 miles per hour at 27 degrees oblique. The effective crosswind component was 5.1 miles per hour for the Sierra Match King 220-grain 30 Win Mag projectile at 2,950 feet per second muzzle velocity that produced 8.3 in of wind drift at 743 yards. 8.3 in divided by 3.927 in per MOA at 743 yards gave 2.1 MOA windage hold, which he revised to 2.4 MOA for the measured 11.2 miles per hour actual elevation. At 743 yards, the bullet required a 7.1 MA hold above the intended 0 using the reticle's internal scale. Ignoring the compromised turret entirely, she found a 7.1 MOA elevation reference on the reticle hash marks. She found the 2.4 MOA wind reference. She held both without breathing. The cartoon lock settled through her right hand. The lateral edge of her first metacarpal found the grip panel. The micro tremor, the one her father had identified at 300 hours in the Kenner province in 2009 and then systematically eliminated, was absent. 3 breaths, deep, full, each exhale releasing the accumulated stillness from her spine outward through every connected structure. On the third exhale, at the natural respiratory pause, she broke the trigger. The muzzle blast of the 3,000 Win Mag was significant. It was always significant, a physical pressure wave that moved through the chest cavity and reminded the shooter that they were conducting a conversation between physics and geometry at a velocity that left very little room for imprecision. The recoil was 22.6 FTLB, more than twice the M485's 9.8 TLB, and it came back through the stock with the authority of a round designed to remain lethal beyond 1,800 yards. She was already calling the shot before the reticle returned from recoil. The 12 inches steel plate at 743 yards rang. The sound arrived 2.17 seconds after the muzzle blast. The acoustic delay of a round traveling faster than sound over an intermediate distance. The plates' impact, note flat and clear and carrying across the morning range like a single struck bell. No one spoke. She could hear that no one spoke, which was itself a form of speaking. Wicks's voice came in a measured, controlled register. Hit second target. The flag moved to a second position. The second plate was smaller, 10 and circular, set at a distance that she visually estimated and confirmed with the internal reticle scale at 1,127 yards. 1,127 yards. This was where the scope sabotage was designed to destroy her. She reran the calculation in the space between breaths. At 1,127 yards, the 3,000 Win Mag round required 14.8 MOA of elevation above the 100-yard 0. If she tried to use the compromised turret, which was already 4.22 MOA above true 0, she would miscalculate by the full offset and send the round 47.1 and above the plate. If she dialed the turret to what she believed was 14.8 MOA, she would actually be at 19.0 MOA, a catastrophic error at this distance. She was not using the turret. She was using the reticle. She found the 14.8 MOA elevation hash mark on the internal reticle scale. The wind at 1,127 yards required a 3.6 MOA windage hold based on the measured 11.2 miles per hour crosswind and the projectile's drift characteristics at that distance, as she had memorized them from the ballistic table on page 11 of her logbook. She applied at the Corollas correction at 1,127 yards at latitude 32.6 degrees, 6 degrees north for a round fired, due east along the range azimuth was 0.7 MOA. She added it to the wind, holding the total lateral correction to 4.3 MOA. She found that mark on the reticle. She settled into the cartoon lock. The wind had shifted 3 degrees in the 90 seconds since her last kestrel reading, which he tracked by the deflection of a single strand of dried grass at the 600 yards intermediate point. She adjusted 0.2 MOA in her mental hold. 3 breaths. On the third exhale in the natural respiratory pause, she broke the trigger. The 3000 Win Mag left the barrel. 1.34 seconds of travel time. The 10 inches steel plate at 1,127 yards rang, flatter than the first, more resonant. The sound of a smaller plate struck with the full energy of a round that had not lost its authority in the crossing. Dead center, Chief Petty Officer Ben Calder, who was behind the spotting scope at the range officer position, called the impact without being asked to, his voice slightly different from what it had been when he arrived on the range this morning. Hit 11 o'clock, approximately 1 in from center. Wicks did not respond immediately. He was looking at the range at the distance, and then at the 13 Malawian Quatches, and then at the turrets of the Schmidt and Bender scope, which had not moved since Zara had shouldered the rifle. His jaw was set with a particular tension that was not his usual authority. It was the tension of a man whose plan has not worked and who is now recalculating. From 27 feet to the left, Rear Admiral Calloway said nothing. He was watching with the stillness of a man who has decided to receive information before rendering judgment, which was the most dangerous kind of stillness in a room full of people who are still in the process of deciding what they believed. If you can feel what is building right now, drop a comment. Tell us what you are feeling in this moment, because every single person on that range was feeling it too. The particular electricity of a thing that was supposed to go one way beginning to go another. Some of them expected it. Some of them refused to expect it. All of them felt it. Tell us your thoughts below. Third target. Wick said his voice was controlled. It was the most controlled it had been all morning, which meant the effort of control had increased significantly. The flag at the far end of the range moved to a third position. Zara had calculated 1,891 yards from Ballard's information. What she saw through the reticle confirmed it. A 12 inches steel plate on a stand at the base of the eastern RGL line at a distance that placed it at the absolute boundary of what the range facility's geography allowed on the far side of the vehicle access road beyond the 1,400-yard marker. That was the listed maximum firing distance for standard qualifications. Wicks had gone outside the listed parameters. He had done it deliberately. She understood that he had set a target at a distance that had never been used in a qualification exercise on this range, at a distance that the course manual did not include in its assessment criteria, at a distance that had a candidate proposed shooting at it, would have been dismissed as operationally excessive and outside the training envelope. He had said it because he was certain she would miss it. He was certain she would miss it because he had never seen her shoot at this distance. He had never seen her shoot at any distance. He had seen her pick up brass. He had seen her hold a kestrel in a manner that irritated him. He had in his certainty missed everything else. Zara did not move the rifle. She breathed. The distance to the third target. She now verified it precisely using the mil.reticle ranging formula against the known 12 inches plate diameter was 1,887 yards for yards shorter than Ballard's estimate. She revised her firing solution without changing her expression at 1,887 yards. The 3000 Win Mag 220-grain Sierra Match King projectile at 2,950 feet per second muzzle velocity would require 29.1 seconds of flight time. No, 2.51 seconds, not 29.1. The sequence of digits arriving correctly as she ran them. In 2.51 seconds at the current 11.22 miles per hour crosswind at a 27-degree oblique. The effective drift would be 67.3 in divided by 1.047 in per MOA at 1,887 yards. The windage hold was 5.7 MOA. The Corolla's correction at this distance and latitude added 2.1 MOA right, bringing the total lateral hold to 7.8 MOA right. Bullet drop at 1,887 yards. 29.1 MOA of elevation required above the 100-yard zero. She found the 29.1 MOA elevation hash mark on the reticle. It was near the bottom of the reticle's usable range. She confirmed it. She held it. The wind. She looked at the intermediate vegetation along the range. At the coastal scrub oak at the 300-yard mark. The dry chaparral at the 700 yards mark. The lone eucalyptus at the 1,200-yard mark, and the ridge grass at the 1,500 yards mark, the last visible wind indicator before the target. Each one was telling her a slightly different story, and she had to synthesize those stories into a single firing solution that accounted for the wind's behavior across nearly 2 kilometers of coastal California terrain. She spent 47 seconds doing this. She did not rush. This was not a timed exercise. Wicks had said 60 seconds for each target, and she still had 13 seconds. She did not need 13 seconds. She needed 5. She found a 7.8 MOA lateral hold on the reticle. She applied the 29.1 MOA elevation hold simultaneously, finding the intersection point in the reticle where both corrections converged, a point that was not on the center of the crosshair, but in the lower right quadrant of the reticle, a point she had to trust completely and verify through nothing but calculation because there was no spotter here, no confirmed range data, no safety net of institutional verification. Only the numbers her father had taught her to trust and the hands he had helped her build, and the method she had carried from a parking lot in North Carolina to a range in Coronado to this specific morning. This specific plate at 1,887 yards, she settled into the cartoon lock for the 3rd time. The weight of a rifle distributed across her body in the way of something that had been held too many thousands of times to feel foreign. Her spine was a single line. Her left hand was bone support only. No muscular tension. The bipod was taking the weight. Her right hand was the cartoon lock lateral edge of the first metacarpal seated against the grip panel. Trigger finger achieving first contact. The pressure building in a single linear direction with 0 lateral deviation. 0 anticipatory flinch. 0 doubt. 3 breaths. On the first breath, she was aware of the assembled personnel on the range behind her. Not distracted by them. Aware. The way you are aware of the presence of something important without looking at it directly. On the second breath, she was aware of the logbook in her breast pocket, the weight of it against her sternum. 100 pages of block print. 14 years. One man's mastery written down because he believed that what he knew deserved to exist beyond himself. On the third breath, she was aware of none of it. The third breath released everything. The people, the logbook, the brass casings, and the 11 weeks in the planning room, and the laugh that had moved through the room like a current when Wicks had said what he had said. The third breath released Wicks. The third breath released the deal, the expectation, the weight of what this shot meant to everyone watching. What remained was physics, and physics did not care who was holding the rifle. At the natural respiratory pause, at the bottom of the third exhale, where the body is most still, where the heartbeat is furthest from its last contraction and furthest from its next, where the entire physical system is in the specific momentary condition of rest that a shooter waits for, with the patience of someone who has been told their whole life that the shot they are capable of exists. She broke the trigger. The 3,000 Win Mag left the muzzle at 2,950 foot purse, 2.51 seconds, 1,887 yards. The entire range was silent. The kind of silence that happens when 22 people are holding their breath simultaneously and do not know they are doing it. The Pacific fog had burned off fully now, and the morning sun was cutting low and flat across the range, turning everything gold and specific. And in that gold and specific light, 22 people waited. The 12 inches steel plate at 1,887 yards rang. The sound arrived 5.5 seconds after the muzzle blast, not the 2.51 seconds of the bullet's flight, but the additional 2.99 seconds required for the acoustic wave of the impact to travel back against the wind across the same 1,887 yards, arriving at the firing line as a sound that was not large, but was exact. The flat, resonant unmistakable confirmation of steel struck at a distance that most of the people on this range had never attempted in their careers. Ben Calder had his eye to the spotting scope. He did not call the impact immediately. He looked for 3 seconds. His face, which was visible in profile from where Thorne stood at the south edge of the range, ran through a sequence of expressions that began with professional confirmation and ended with something that was not a professional expression at all. "Hit," he said. His voice was not the same voice it had been when he arrived. Center mass approximately 1 in from center. He paused, then quietly, almost himself, at 1887 yards. No one spoke for 4 seconds. Wicks was standing with his clipboard at his side and his jaw at the particular set of man whose certainty has just been displaced by evidence and who has not yet completed the internal negotiation between what he believed and what he has been shown. He was looking downrange at the target. He was looking at the 13 Malawian Quatches. He was looking at the scope turrets, which had not been touched. Zara rose from the prone. She dusted the sand from the front of her utility uniform. She locked the bolt of the 13 Malawian Quatches to the rear, clear, safe. She sat on the bipod. She stood at the firing line with her hands at her sides. Rear Admiral Calloway walked forward. He walked from the left edge of the range to the center. And as he walked, the 22 people on the range arranged themselves into the unconscious formation that assembled groups produce when a figure of genuine authority moves through them. Not parting exactly, but adjusting, redistributing, acknowledging in the language of bodies. He stopped in front of Wicks. He did not look at Wicks immediately. He looked downrange at the 3 target positions at the eastern Rigel line, where the 3rd plate was still visible in the morning gold. A small circle of steel at a distance that had no business being in any qualification string on any training range in this compound. Then he looked at Wicks. "Master Chief," he said. His voice was very calm. It was the calm of a man who does not need volume because he has never needed volume. "I received a report 4 days ago regarding training conditions on Range 17. I will tell you that I did not expect to observe what I have just observed this morning." Wicks straightened. "Admiral, this was an informal exercise between—" "I know what it was," Calloway said. He let 1 second pass. "I also know that the scope on that rifle was adjusted 4.2 minutes of angle from 0 at approximately 0030 this morning. I know this because the range shed security camera was operational and the footage was delivered to my office at 0600 hours. He let another second pass. Whoever conducted that adjustment did not check whether the camera was active. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from the one after the 3rd shot. The first silence had been awe. This silence was reckoning. Wicks did not look at Ballard. The deliberateness of not looking at Ballard was itself a form of looking. Calloway turned from Wicks. He turned to Zara. He looked at her the way admirals look at things they have decided to take seriously, which is differently from how they look at everything else, without the administrative remove, without the rank filtering that most senior officers apply to the world below them. He looked at her directly as a person, at a woman who had just shot a 12-inch steel plate at 1,887 yards with a scope that had been deliberately compromised using no turret adjustments in front of a range full of people who had gathered specifically because they expected her to fail. "How long have you been shooting?" He said. 20 years, Admiral Zara said. "Since I was 9. Your father?" Staff Sergeant Rashid Khatun, USMC, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. Calloway nodded once slowly with the weight of a man who knows the name he has just heard. "I know that name," he said. "Sanjin, 2014. "Yes, Admiral." He nodded again. He was quiet for a moment in the way of someone deciding something. "Then who issued you the assignment to Range 17 administrative reassignment from SEAL Team through logistics support following a budget realignment, Admiral, 11 weeks ago?" He turned to one of his aides and said 4 words quietly. The aide produced a small notebook and wrote in it. Then Calloway turned back to Zura and said in the same level voice, the voice that did not need to be loud to arrive, "Petty Officer, 2nd Class Cartoon. I want you to understand something. What I watched this morning was not a demonstration of a sniper. A demonstration is something you perform for an audience. What I watched was someone doing a thing they already knew how to do in front of people who made the mistake of requiring a proof. He looked at the 13 Malawian kwaches on the bipod. He looked at the scope with its tampered turrets and its unchanged reticle. The record will reflect that you completed a 3-target unknown distance qualification string at distances of 743 yards, 1,127 yards, and 1,887 yards with a compromised optic achieving center mass impacts on all 3 targets. That record will be placed in your permanent service jacket. He looked at Wicks again. All of it. Every event leading to this morning and every event of this morning itself. He turned back to the range. He looked at the eastern ridge line for a moment. "What is your father's rifle doing?" he asked. He had noticed the logbook shape through her breast pocket. His logbook, Admiral. "I keep it with me." Calloway said nothing for 2 seconds, then so quietly that only she and the aide beside him fully heard it. "Good. Keep it there." He walked back to the gray government vehicle. His aides followed. He got in the vehicle, left the range. We're going to stop for just a moment, because if you're watching this and you have ever had someone in authority really look at you and say without politics and without ceremony that they see what you are, then you know what Zara Khatun felt in that moment. Not triumph, not vindication, not the satisfaction of being proven right. Something quieter, something that felt like a door opening in a room she had been standing outside for 11 weeks, for 9 years, for her whole adult life. Tell us what word you would use for that feeling. We want to know. The events of the following 31 days moved through the compound with a quiet efficiency of institutional consequence. Master Chief Petty Officer Drayden Wickses was relieved of his position as lead instructor of the NSW Advanced Sniper Course, pending an administrative review of the Range 17 security footage and the pattern of conduct it documented. The review was completed in 22 days. It found that the scope adjustment had been conducted by Senior Chief Petty Officer Todd Ballard at Wicks's direction, communicated verbally 3 days prior to the qualification event. It found a pattern of systematic additional duty assignments applied to range support personnel E5 cotton that exceeded all documented precedents for the position. It found 18 incidents of intimidation through the exercise of command authority. Wicks's relief was confirmed. He was transferred to a non-instructional administrative post at Naval Station Norfolk. Ballard received a formal letter of reprimand, a reduction in rank from senior chief to chief petty officer, and reassignment to the recruit training pipeline at Great Lakes, Illinois. These were the facts. They were clean and institutional, and they existed in official documents that would follow both men through the remainder of their service. Zara was not told any of this directly. She learned it the way most things are learned in large institutions, through the specific texture of the air. After a decision has been made, through the way Chief Petty Officer Ben Calder looked at her the morning after Calloway's visit, through the absence of additional duty assignments in the days that followed, through the arrival of orders in her administrative inbox 3 weeks after the qualification that read in the precise language of official military correspondence. Petty Officer Sekenas Khatunsa M. is hereby assigned to the NSW Advanced Sniper Course Naval Amphibious Base Coronado in the capacity of instructor effective upon completion of the required instructor certification program. Tenure of assignment 18 months with review. She read it twice, not because she did not understand it the first time, because some things deserve to be read twice. She went to find Thorne. He was in the range shed because he was always in the range shed. And when she walked in, he was at the workbench with a cleaning kit and an unhurried demeanor and the expression of a man who already knows the thing you are about to tell him. She showed him the orders. He read them. He set them on the bench. He looked at her with the kind of steadiness that exists in men who have seen enough of a world to know that the moments worth holding on to are always quieter than the moments worth surviving. Your father, he said, would have found a way to make this seem like it was your idea the whole time. She almost smiled. She felt the almost smile happen in the part of her face that had not produced many smiles in the past 11 weeks. He would have pretended he wasn't keeping track. She said he would have been terrible at pretending. Thorne said he was terrible at pretending. The man cried at the 2012 Super Bowl. He thought no one saw. He paused. Everyone saw. She sat on the overturned ammunition crate where Pack had sat 6 weeks ago with 2 paper coffee cups and the honesty of someone too young to be strategic about it. She looked at the workbench and the cleaning kit and the 13 Malawian kwaches at the far end of the bench. And she thought about the 43 brass casing she had picked up on the first morning and the weight she had felt in the 44th. "He sent me here," she said, not as a statement requiring confirmation, as an acknowledgement of something she had understood for a while and was only now saying aloud. Thorne was quiet. "Then he sent you here 9 years ago when he took you to that parking lot in Lejeune. He just didn't know the mailing address yet." Zara nodded. They sat in the shed for a while. The Pacific fog was doing what it always did, pressing at the corrugated walls, patient and coastal and entirely unconcerned with the human events occurring inside the building it surrounded. The smell was HAPA solvent and CLP lubricant, and the particular metal smell of a place where precision instruments are maintained with care. Outside on Range 17, the morning light was beginning to come through. Tell us something. If you have made it this far in this story, you are not the person who clicks away. You are the person who stays. Drop a comment right now and tell us one thing. What does this story make you want to do? Because we believe that stories like this one exist not just to be watched, but to be carried, not just to entertain, but to remind people of something they already knew. Tell us. We want to know what it reminded you of. 6 weeks after her instructor certification was complete, Petty Officer First Class Zerit Khatun. She had been promoted 1 rank, affected the date of her new assignment, was standing at the south end of Range 17 at 700 hours in front of 14 candidates who were arranged in 2 rows of 7 and were looking at her with a combination of respect and uncertainty that newly assembled groups bring to the people who have been assigned to determine what they are capable of. David Pack was not among them. David Pack had graduated the Advanced Sniper course 12 days earlier, finishing 3rd in his cohort with a final qualification score of 91.4 out of 100. He had corrected his natural point of aim deviation, eliminated the muscular tension in his right shoulder, and cured the anticipatory flinch through 3 sessions of structured dry fire practice that a petty officer's second ass on range support duty had described to him on an evening in November while cleaning 16 rifles alone in a shed with a light going gray. He had left Range 17 for an assignment with SEAL Team 7, Virginia Beach. He had sent her one message before he shipped out. It said, 3 sessions. You were right. The 14 candidates in front of her now were at the beginning of something. They did not know what that beginning required. That was why she was here. She looked at them for a moment before speaking. She looked at the range behind them. The 300 yards line, the 500 yards line, the 700 yards line, the 875 yards terminal berm. She looked at the eastern ridge line in the distance where the 3rd plate had been on that morning 6 weeks ago. The plate was gone, taken down the day after by the range maintenance crew. The stand remained. She thought about the weight of the 44th brass casing. The way 9 years of something held quietly could occupy a space that had no name until it found the right moment to become a thing with a name. She looked at the 14 candidates. My name is Petty Officer First Class Cartoon. She said, I am your primary instructor for the next 10 weeks. I want to tell you 3 things before we begin. The morning light was coming in at the specific October angle she had learned in 11 weeks of 0445 arrivals gold and low in particular. The first thing, this course has a 44% graduation rate. That number will not change because of anything I do or anything you do. It is a number produced by the distance between what this profession requires and what most people are capable of bringing to it. I will not lower the requirement. I will not change the number. She paused. What I will do is ensure that every person who does not graduate fails for legitimate reasons, and every person who graduates earns it completely. One of the candidates in the front row, a young petty officer named Reyes, 23 years old from Corpus Christi, shifted his weight slightly. The second thing, I will expect you to know what you know, not what you think you should know. Not what you have been told you know. What you actually specifically demonstrably know. If you know your wind reading, know it. If you know your holdover, know it. If you don't know it, tell me that you don't know it. Both things are useful. Pretending to know is not. The second row remained perfectly still. The third thing, she reached in her left breast pocket and produced her father's logbook. She held it up briefly, not to show them what was in it, but to show them that it existed, that it was real, that it was worn and filled and present in the world in the way that things are present when they have been carried by a person who meant what they were carrying. Someone gave this to me before I could read it. I have been reading it for 20 years. What is in it is not secrets, and it is not tricks. It is one man's method written down because he believed that mastery deserved to outlive the person who found it. She put the logbook back in her pocket. What you find in the next 10 weeks, write it down. Not because someone tells you to, because it might matter to someone after you. Because the things you learn in this course, at the edge of your capability, those things do not belong only to you. She looked at them. They never did. She let 1 second pass. Rifles to the firing line. They moved. She watched the move with a particular attention she had developed in 11 weeks of watching from a position no one had taken seriously. A position that had turned out to have a better view than any of the official ones. She watched the way Reyes carried his M485 slightly high on the carry muzzle up, which suggested a habituation to confined spaces' urban background. Worth noting, she watched the way a candidate named Ortega set up his bipod efficiently. No wasted motion. Good. She watched a candidate named Singh look at the eastern ridgeline for a long moment before settling into his prone. And she noted the look because it was the look of someone who had been told about the morning 6 weeks ago and was deciding what to do with the information. She let them all settle. She walked the line from left to right with her hands behind her back and the Kestrel 4500 in her right hand, taking a reading every 4 paces, 10.88 miles per hour, 14 degrees oblique, temperature 62 degrees Fahrenheit. She reached the south end of the range. Beside the range shed on the ground, near the bin where she had spent 11 weeks sorting brass by caliber, there was a single spent 7.62 x 51 millimeters NATO casing she had left there deliberately this morning. She had set it there at 0445 when she arrived, placed it carefully standing and down on the gravel. She picked it up. It weighed 10.7 g. It had always weighed 10.7 g. It had weighed that much on the first morning when she had picked up the 44th one and felt something that had no name for a while. And it weighed the same now in a hand that had since then placed 3 rounds on 3 steel targets at distances that this range had never previously measured. Nothing about the object had changed. Everything about the hand holding it had changed. She looked at it for a moment. The California sun was coming full over the eastern hills now, burning the last of the marine layer off the bay, turning the range into the particular gold of October mornings in San Diego, a light that was generous and warm and entirely indifferent to what happened beneath it, and therefore exactly the right light for a person to do something true. She set the casing back on the gravel, standing and down. She walked back to the firing line. 14 candidates in the prone, 14 minutes and 485 seconds on bipods. 14 people at the beginning of the most demanding 10 weeks of their professional lives. Wind is running at 10.8 miles per hour, she said. 14 degrees oblique. The first assessment string begins in 5 minutes. Low to make ready. The bolt cycled down the line with the sound of something institutional and serious and ongoing. The sound of the thing that had been happening on this range long before she arrived and would continue long after she was gone, but which was now on this morning, being conducted by someone who had picked up brass on this same ground for 11 weeks and had understood in that time that the view from the ground was not lesser than the view from the firing line. It was different and different in the right hands, with the right patience, with the right method, written on page 43 of a composition notebook by a man who had trusted that someone would someday need it. Different was enough, more than enough. It was the whole point. Before you go, we need to ask you to do something. If this story moved you, not just entertained you, but moved something in you, drop a comment below and tell us one word, just one, the word that describes what Zara Khatun's story means to you. We have been collecting those words from viewers for a long time. And what we find consistently in the comments under stories like this one is that the word is always the same. It changes in spelling and in language and in the specific syllables different voices use to carry it. But the word is always the same. Drop it in the comments. Let's hear it in your voice. And if you were someone who was told once by someone who should have known better that the thing you carried was not the right thing, that the knowledge you had was not the right knowledge, that the position you occupied was the only position available to you, this story was for you. It was always for you. Hit subscribe if you want to stay with us. And share this with one person, just one, who needs to hear it today. Because the world is full of people picking up brass on ranges where they are not supposed to understand what they are watching. And some of them need to know that what they carry is not wasted. It is only waiting. The first day of instruction ended at 18:30 hours. 14 candidates had completed their initial 300-yard qualification strings. And the data was exactly what she had expected, a distribution that spread from a high of 88.3% to a low of 63.7%, with a majority clustered in the 71 to 79% band that indicated technical competence without the precision refinement the course would demand. 3 candidates showed the same anticipatory flinch pattern she had identified in PAC 6 weeks ago. She noted all 3 names. She noted their exact flinch signatures, the half-second grip tightening, the microscopic shoulder elevation, the closed eye tell that most instructors missed because they were watching the target instead of the shooter's body. She watched the shooter's body. She had always watched the shooter's body. By 1900 hours, the range was cleared. The brass was sorted. A different petty officer on range support duty doing it now. A young man named Torres, who moved through the task with the efficiency of someone who had been told it was important without being told why. She watched him work for a moment from the edge of the range, and she did not see herself in his movement exactly. But she saw the position, the kneeling posture, the canvas bag, the unhurried pace, and the position was familiar in the way of rooms you have lived in and left and occasionally stand outside of, not with regret, but with a specific recognition of someone who understands what a place required of them and knows that the requirement was not wasted. Torres looked up. He saw her watching. He straightened slightly. "Good work," she said, and walked back toward the range operations building. Thorne was in the shed when she passed. He was locking the 13 Malawian kwaches into its transit case with the deliberate care of someone performing a final task. She stopped in the doorway. He looked up. "My contract renewal came back," he said. "They reduced the scope of the maintenance authorization budget cycle." He latched the case. "I'll be off the compound by the end of November." She looked at him, Thorne in the corrugated shed, with a hoppa smell and the gray metal walls and the late light coming through the western slats in flat orange bars. He looked exactly the same as he had looked on the first morning she had recognized him 9 weeks ago. Compressed through the thoracic spine, slightly forward shoulders, hands that were always slightly curled. The man who had known her father for 11 years. The man who had unlocked the shed at 2,000 hours so that a petty officer on range support duty could confirm at 1,000 yards what she already knew. "Harlan," she said. She almost never used his first name. He looked at her with a steady expression of a man who has already completed the internal work of accepting a thing and does not require the conversation to be harder than it needs to be. "Your father would have had 17 things to say about this moment," he said. "All of them extremely specific, and most of them slightly embarrassing." He paused. "I only have one thing." She waited. "You were always the answer." He said everything he worried about. All the things he carried about, whether what he knew would go past him, whether it would make it somewhere beyond him. You were always the answer. He just didn't live long enough to watch you prove it. He picked up the transit case. "I watched it for him. That's all." He left the shed. She stood in the space he had occupied for a moment. The western light through the slats was going from orange to red. The particular end of day California light that did not apologize for being beautiful in the middle of serious things. She stood in it and let it be what it was. Then she sat on the overturned ammunition crate, and she took the logbook from her breast pocket and she opened it. Not to page 43. Not to the atmospheric data from Camp Leon in 2007. Not to the wind readings and the firing solutions and the 14 years of block print precision that her father had trusted to paper because he believed it deserved to exist beyond himself. She opened it to the page after the last entry. The page where she had written 2 nights before the qualification. October 19th. Wind TBD range 1-891Y. The lock is ready. Everything after this is just execution. Below that line, she uncapped her pen. She wrote the date, November 24th. She wrote the temperature, 62 degrees Fahrenheit. She wrote the wind, 10.8 miles per hour, 14 degrees oblique. She wrote first day of instruction, 14 candidates. 3 with flinch patterns correctable. Range 17, NAB Coronado. Everything forward from here. She looked at the entry for a moment. The block print was not as precise as her father's. She had not spent 14 years of combat deployments making it precise, but it was exact and it was specific. And it was written in the same notebook on the next page after his last entry with the same intent to put a thing down that deserved to outlive the person who found it. She kept the pen. She pressed the logbook flat against her palm, both hands around it. The way you hold something that is simultaneously a finished thing and a beginning thing that is both an inheritance and a forward motion that weighs exactly what it weighs and also everything it represents. And those two weights are not the same, but they are both real. She put it back in her breast pocket. She walked out of the shed into the last of the orange light, across the gravel of Range 17, past the 300 yards line and the brass bins and the east-facing berm where she had knelt for 11 weeks with a canvas bag and a kestrel and 20 years of something that no one in this compound had thought to ask about. She walked toward the range operations building. Behind her, the range was quiet. Tomorrow would be loud again. Bolt cycling, muzzle reports, steel ringing at known and unknown distances. 14 people learning the distance between what they thought they knew and what they actually needed to know. She would be there at 0445. She was always there at 0445. And every morning that she stood at the gate of Range 17 before the light came full over the eastern hills. She would carry the logbook and the kestrel and the cartoon lock and the memory of the 44th brass casing, and she would understand in the specific calibrated unambiguous way that she understood wind and distance and the precise intersection of elevation and holdover that none of it had been wasted. Not the 11 weeks, not the canvas bag, not the additional duties, not the laughter in the planning room or the tampered turret or the years before any of it. The years of block print in parking lots and a man in a composition notebook at 0300 hours in the Cunard province refusing to accept the distance between the shot he was capable of and the shot he was making. None of it had been wasted. It had all been the preparation. Every single unacknowledged, unseen, unpermissioned moment of it. The preparation for a morning on a range where a rear admiral stood in the early light and said in the quiet voice of someone who no longer needed to speak loudly, "This is what it looks like when someone has been doing the work the whole time." The eastern Rigeline caught the last light and held it for a moment before releasing it into the dark. Range 17 was still, and somewhere in the hills beyond the ridge, at a distance of 1,887 yards from where she had been lying in the prone 6 weeks ago, a steel plate stood on a stand in the coastal scrub, unmarked and unremarkable, carrying a single circular indentation slightly less than 1 in from its center. Proof of nothing. Evidence of everything.